What is the libertarian philosophy, or is there one? That's what we're going to be discussing today on the Conversation of Our Generation, where we are solving the problems of today with the wisdom of the past. My name's Nick Jamel, the host here at the podcast, creator of the blog, conversationofourgeneration.com. And today I want to talk about some of the arguments for liberty, a book that I came across on just randomly on Amazon when I think it was like one of the suggested things when I was looking up some Lysander Spooner, which I talked about last week, and his ideas on natural law. What I want to talk about today are I'm not going to go through all 9 of the arguments for liberty in here. Maybe we can talk more deeply about them in Tuesday podcasts going forward, or maybe I can break these out into individual reviews of some of these essays and explain what I think about them. But it is a great look at the whole understanding of kind of the libertarian, liberty-minded political ideologies. The problem is none of these include God, and I think that that is something that makes liberty very hard to defend. And the reason being, I think, is you need a God to be able to explain why humans have freedom, why people have freedom to choose. And the rest of all of these arguments in this book are out of expediency or utility for the most part. There are a couple that are better than that, right? They do have Kantianism in here, and kind of an ethical intuitionism is okay. Virtue ethics is a strong one here, but still without some sort of understanding of God. And the person, I think it's the strongest case, even though the person kind of seems to doubt it, because I think if I remember correctly, they were not really an Aristotelian, and that's kind of what they're arguing from. And I think that's really the only place you can get a good grounding in liberty without God. So, funny enough. But this book is great. I mean, it goes through utilitarianism, natural rights, just as an essay, Kantianism, contractarianism, Rawlsianism, virtue ethics, objectivism, ethical intuitionism, and moral pluralism. And I think that each one of those ideas individually does not hold ground. You can kind of cobble a few of these together to get a somewhat arguable position, I think. But I think it in the end falls short. And the reason is, I think the problem with libertarianism a lot of the time is it tries to put forth this idea that it is a coherent political philosophy when it's sort of a jumble of political philosophies. And for instance, a different one would be classical liberalism is a coherent philosophy. Now, it may be applied differently a little bit, but it is coherent. Conservatism is much more of an approach to political questions, I would say, but there is a little bit, there's a lot of political philosophy behind it. Do not get me wrong. I'm not saying that it doesn't have weight, but in different situations and different times, conservatism looks different. And so that's, I think, tough to really pin down. But then you have progressivism, which is a very coherent philosophy. We know what the progressives believe, right? If you read Hegel and Marx, and then you kind of go into the Frankfurt School and some of these kind of neo-Marxist ideas, like we did with Fools, Frauds, and Firebrands, you can see what the progressives believe. But I think that libertarians are a bit fractured, and I think it's because we have two different sets. You have, as this book kind of has, primarily atheistic libertarians, and that's one set, the ones who say you should be able to do whatever you want, sex work is work, those sorts of things, the ones who give into a sense of licentiousness. And then you have the sort of, I would say, your Midwest rural rural libertarians that are people who just want to be left alone, who are raising their family, live in the small town. There's a lot of people like that who probably are registered Republicans, but you're kind of, that's how, if you look at Thomas Massey and Rand Paul and a lot of these, Mike Lee, a lot of these kind of staunch conservative on social issues for the most part, they're pretty good on that. They may be a little bit more drug friendly than conservatives want generally, but they are definitely for the education of your own children, the small communities, building up community, that sort of thing. They are against a lot of the craziness that, they may be a little bit more friendly to gay marriage or something like that, but the trans issues but again, I think that, I'm not sure, but I think that the Pauls and Massey are not Catholic too. So they may be in some of the Christian churches that are leaning that way too. So they are better on a lot of those questions, I think, than even many conservatives are, right? I think they're better probably than Liz Cheney is on a lot of those. And so they have this, but they also have this libertarian streak in them where they are really, really against these regulations, like raw milk regulations, like small farmers being able to sell to their neighbors, because they should be able to, but they're not able to due to different regulations about whatever's going on. And that sort of libertarianism, I think, is supported by a Judeo-Christian worldview, an understanding of the great philosophers and how we come to moral conclusions, moral and ethical conclusions, and a dedication to preserving liberty, because they recognize that while it can be misused, liberty ordered properly is going to be not only the best thing for human flourishing, like we talk about all the time, economically and in your life, but it is the best thing for you spiritually, to be free and to choose the good, right? It is, I don't know if it's better to be forced into, it's probably better to be forced into choosing the good than to choose evil. But the best thing to do is to be free to choose the good and do it, because you are educated, you are brought up correctly, and you understand why you're choosing the good that you're choosing, right? Aristotle talks about in the Nicomachean Ethics that virtue is choosing the good. It's knowingly, it's a state of being, it's a knowing choice, and a choice that you understand why you're doing it, what you're doing, and the effect of your choice and all of that. So all that has to go into it to become virtuous. So if you are being forced to choose what is good, well, you might be able to do the right things, but you're not becoming a virtuous person. You're not becoming a good person. You're just an obedient person, which can be good, but can also be bad if you're obeying the wrong people. And so I think that there is a coherent libertarian philosophy that could be put forward, but I think you need to almost have a split among libertarians, so which would be tough, because a lot of these people who are what I would say the more licentious side of the libertarians, and not even that they are themselves. I just want to clarify that they're not even necessarily, sleeping around themselves or whatever. And I was probably in this camp that, you can do those things, or, maybe it's wrong, but well, we can't do anything about it. That's the last argument in here is moral pluralism. And basically his argument is there's so many moral codes, we can't know what's right. So we just have to leave people to their own devices. And I'm like, well, there's certain things that we can know are right or wrong. And I do agree that you have to have a little bit of wiggle room for people to mess up and to make the wrong choice. But I think most people would agree that murder is something that should just be off the table. That's not something that we should be pluralistic about. Child sacrifice is something that's just, no, that's a no. So I think that is where libertarianism goes wrong. And there's problems with it. As I've grown in my understanding of the world around me, in the philosophies, the politics of our history, the philosophies that have been handed down to us through, Greece and even the Eastern, right? Like when you read the Church Fathers, for instance, like some of the Eastern Fathers, but even like Lao Tzu and Confucius, there's more, I think, to a political philosophy than simply liberty. And that's where I think a lot of libertarians go wrong, is that, yes, we need to have great arguments in favor of liberty. And that's what's great about this book. But we have to oppose liberty with, or juxtapose, arguments for justice, right? That needs to be there. Arguments for social cohesion need to be there because those are also goods, and we have to find the good balance of goods based on our culture and our society and how we function, right? It's a different balance here in America than it might be in other places and other times because of our government system, because of the founding of our country. And all the conservatives are probably liking how I'm talking about this now, because we have to really look at preserving the culture and society that we have, and doing so in a way by balancing the goods and kind of the original balance of goods that we had in our society when it was founded, right? We had I would say, we obviously had slavery, we had problems in our country when it was founded, but we had a set of ideals that we had juxtaposed: liberty, justice, right? And I mean, that's one of our things is liberty and justice for all, right? Those are the two things that we say everyone should have. And that, I think, is what we have to remember, is that we can't just take liberty in and of itself. We can't just take progress in and of itself and make that the ultimate good. I think liberty is a primary political good, a top shelf, right? But you have three primary colors, right? You can have multiple primary things, top level priorities that you want to preserve, and liberty is one of them. Justice is one of them. And I would say kind of a federalism, localism, right? That idea is one of them as well. That is not the same as liberty or justice, but provides the best way possible in America those two goods that we want to pursue. And so if you want to, the reason I'm bringing this book out is because I think it's great. The essays aren't super long. They're like, I don't remember exactly. It's been a while since I've read this book, and I'm probably going to have to go back through a few of these and review a couple of them. But it's Arguments for Liberty, and it's a collection of essays by different professors, but it's edited together by Aaron Ross Powell and Grant Babcock. So I'll have a link in the show notes for you to check that out. I recommend, if you're conservative, liberal, libertarian, whatever, it's great to read because you get a full sense of the different libertarian thinkers over the last 150, 200 years-ish, even kind of like the pre-libertarian of the classical liberals that kind of lead to that libertarian outlook. It's great. You get Ayn Rand's ideas, you get all of these essays put forward in 30 to 50 pages, something like that, I think. And each one of them has a good argument for what they're making, or for the argument that they're trying to put forward. It's solid. And so I think it's great for anyone who wants to understand what libertarians think. And I think you need to. I think you need to understand, even if it's not your political viewpoint, which it's probably not, considering, well, if you're listening to my show, you're more likely probably to be in the libertarian space. But it's still 3% of people voting in an election at the most. So, it's not a huge percentage, but it is a sizable, I would say, a sizable part of our political conversation, and one that comes in to play a lot. And so instead of just kind of the ad hominem attacks on people, or the writing off of people because of what they say, what party they say they're a part of, I think it's better to understand a person's ideas instead of being dismissive. And so if you want to understand the arguments for liberty from a more libertarian perspective, I recommend you check it out, because I think it's great to have these, to have your sort of conservative ideas, your Burkean, Chestertonian ideas about what is right for liberty, and to understand what progressives think even, and your kind of classical liberals, your John Locke's and people like that. And you piece those together, and I think you get a fuller picture of where we are, because at the Conversation of Our Generation, it's about knowing what the arguments are, knowing what's happening in the conversation. And so if you don't know what the other side's saying, if you don't know what someone else is arguing from, the background of their beliefs, then you're going to have trouble connecting with them in a good dialogue. So knowing the things you disagree with is important, knowing the things you agree with more deeply is important. So whichever way you are on that, Arguments for Liberty is a great book to pick up. It's a few hundred pages, but there's 9 great essays in there, so you can kind of break it up. It doesn't have to be read all at once. You can kind of go through those piece by piece, intermingle them in with other reading, and it works out. So definitely check out that book. I think I'll probably be doing more on some of the essays in it, but for now, I recommend you check out Arguments for Liberty. Let me know what you think, and if you're enjoying the conversation of our generation, please subscribe to the podcast, subscribe on YouTube, smash the like button, and make sure that you hit the bell so you get notifications when videos come out on YouTube, and leave a rating and review on the podcast wherever you're listening to it. Because, and also, if you were listening to the podcast and you got unsubscribed, somehow I had 2 feeds going. So I stopped one, I canceled it on my WordPress site, and I'm using the Anchor one. So you can just go to if you follow me on Twitter, you use my link tree, it'll take you to the podcast. Go to conversationfourgeneration.com/podcast to get subscribed. Wherever you subscribe, I have right at the top of the page, there's the little icons. Click the one that leads to where you listen, and it'll take you there. So definitely, please resubscribe and get on there if you were subscribed to the other one. I kept the one that had the more reviews, so that's how I decided it. There was one that didn't seem to be getting much attention because it had 1 review, and so please leave a good rating and review at the other one. If you have just 10 seconds to spare, it really helps, and it doesn't take much time at all if you're already listening to it in your app. So thank you for listening, and the last thing that I want to remind you of is if you want to support the work I'm doing here at the Conversation of Our Generation, please go to conversationfourgeneration.com/subscribe. For $5 a month, you get access to the Discord community. You get premium content like my course that's coming out and a copy of my book shipped to you. So please go and support me there for $5 a month. It helps build up what I'm doing and will make me more resilient in the future from canceling, from just the whims of big tech, right? If there's a following of people who are supporting me, then, and I get kicked off Twitter and something happens like that for whatever I say, well, I don't lose everything, and I can still build up and still bring content to you in new and different ways. So definitely check that out, and thank you again for listening to the Conversation of Our Generation. Let's get the dialogue going. I'll talk to you next time.